we'll leave well enough alone, and we'll move right along with 1 Corinthians 10:26. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And with that note, let there be light. I need to turn a little bit more light on in the live stream studios. Some people like to call them their locations the world headquarters. Maybe we'll be that pompous today as well and say the world headquarters of Anthony and Kathleen Patch. Anyway, without further ado, all right, happy birthday, Andy. Happy birthday. I see that. St. Andrew. My goodness. Okay. Well, we've got lots of people here this evening. Thank you. Thank you for a pre-Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving from everyone that has sent it to us, and we are sending back to you. Let me get back on camera here. I've shown you the blue marble, as someone said in the chat room earlier. Yes, the blue marble. It isn't feeling too well, and Dr. Darnell is auscultating the lung sounds of the earth with the stethoscope there. Thank you, Dr. Darnell. Bring myself on camera, silly one that I am. Okay, so, as I said, geoengineeringwatch.org, our good friend Dane Wigington, he was kind enough to participate as one of 6 speakers in our very first webinar that Kathleen and I did together, which was full spectrum dominance and the art of war according to Sun Tzu. And he was presenting his research on geoengineering, which again he will do tonight. I'm sure he has plenty of updates for us. As you know, Doug and I, about a week and a half ago, we participated together, Doug and I, in a live stream that we shared with you regarding quantum computing as it applies to geoengineering. And if you haven't watched that video, I encourage you to. It was about 35 minutes long. It also included really a very basic introduction to quantum mechanics and quantum computing, because it was intended for Dane's audience to be able to, when we shared the video with them, for them to be able to be introduced to quantum mechanics and quantum computing, which you already have that introduction, but it's always nice to have a little review, and it's something you could steer somebody to in that regard as an introductory level to that topic. So tonight, what I would like to do in the time remaining here, because I want to be punctual for Dane at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, I want to remind you that the December issue of Entangled magazine, coming out on the 1st of December, will be focused upon nanodiamonds, but it is the connecting of nanodiamonds with the Libra cryptocurrency and the blockchain infrastructure of the beast system, all of which totals up to the mark of the beast coming. And the access to that nanodiamond driven system, nanodiamond because it is the sensors of the Internet of all things, it is the sensor of the beast system, nanodiamonds being prolific throughout the environment and will continue to increase in their distribution in frequency and in quantity. So I'm focusing on the background on nanodiamonds in the magazine, but it does lead and tie into this decision that the world will need to make regarding the mark of the beast. Nanodiamonds themselves are not going to be responsible for producing the physical mark, but they are the information gathering and relaying sensor system of the blockchain led by Libra, becoming one world global currency. Now today I was doing some more background research for the magazine on the nanodiamonds, and I happened to run across a number of articles and actually a number of books that have come out recently that are specifically citing Libra, not just cryptocurrencies, but Libra as the coming global currency. So I was basing all of that from putting together the background on Concordia that we presented in the November issue of Entangled magazine. Kathleen and I put the put the nanodiamonds together, connected the diamonds, and we looked at Libra and we looked at Concordia and we looked at the blockchain system that was completely unique that was being built out and is set to be built out. But looking at the technical nuts and bolts of Libra, we could see very clearly that it was going to be the global currency. Now we are seeing those in the secular world, in the scholastic world, publishing confirmational books and articles saying exactly what Kathleen and I have said, that Libra is the coming single global currency. And I just found that today. I hadn't really gone searching specifically for it as that, but you know, that's how the Lord works. And so we were going along a path looking at the individuals, the leaders, and the organizations and the businesses and the countries that were forming as a foundation Libra, and came to the conclusion that this will be the currency of the world from that perspective, that direction of research. So that is something that I really, you know, as we come together with the December issue of Entangle magazine, we are really putting the cement in place on those building blocks. We're really pulling those nanodiamonds together, because the nanodiamonds, the Libra currency, and its blockchain all fit in together as jigsaw puzzle pieces. Okay? So for tonight's topic, what I would like to bring to your attention, get to my article here. I would like to, and I sent this to you before the live stream, it's from International Relations, and this is a review of a book published in 1993 by Samuel P. Huntington, entitled The Third Wave, the Democratization in the Late 20th Century. And this was a thesis published by Stephen McGlinchey in September 23rd of 2010, entitled A Second Look at Huntington's Third Wave. I'm going to read this in its entirety to you. It isn't terribly long, but I want you to bear in mind dominoes that I already set up for you a few live streams ago. Bear that in mind as I read this, and there will be things that leap off the page. At the conclusion of this, or perhaps as I get about two-thirds of the way through this, I'm going to interject my 180 on this. I'm going to interject an update, because this book was published in 93. The thesis that we're reading from this evening was in 2010, so it needs some updating even from then. And I'll be providing that to you this evening. So very quickly, Samuel P. Huntington's 1993 book, and let me get the image of that up for you, because I'm pretty sure I included it. Okay, let me put it up real quickly, the cover of the book, because I was scurrying getting other things put together. I'll put the cover up for you. There it is. Okay. This is available on Kindle for about $20. I'm currently reading it right now, but I really like this thesis summary of this, so it's a great introduction if you choose to go ahead and read this book. The Third Wave, Democratization in the late 20th century was heralded upon its release as an insightful and useful contribution to political science. With that in mind, and also considering the recent death of the author, it is worth taking another look at the text, considering the democratization attempts pursued by America and its allies in the Middle East in the early years of the 21st century. Okay, so here it is, the Middle East, already one of, or I should say the central focus of, the dominoes that I began to introduce to you. In the book, The Third Wave, Samuel Huntington attempts to explain the process of democratization in contemporary world politics as occurring in three distinct waves beginning in the early 19th century and continuing into the present day. Now, let me put up another image for you. This is why Kathleen brought this to my attention. This is why things get kind of exciting around here. Third wave. Okay. There we go. That is the third wave of the Libra coin. Another jigsaw puzzle piece. Put simply, a wave of democratization is a group of transitions from non-democratic regimes to democratic regimes that occur within a specified period of time and that significantly outnumber transitions in the opposite direction. In order to set the process of democratization in an identifiable context, a dichotomous approach is used, drawing heavily on Schumpeter's, that's Schumpeter's, Schumpeter's democratic method, which emphasizes democracy as merely institutional arrangement for arriving at political decisions in which individuals acquire the power to decide by means of a competitive struggle for the people's vote. Any theoretical arguments and any notion of classic democracy are discarded in favor of a research-based empirical study into the procedural nature of democracy. This procedural approach makes classification of regimes as democratic or otherwise a relatively simple task through applying clinical benchmarks and criteria. The acceptance of Huntington's thesis will rest on whether the reader agrees that elections are the inescapable essence of democracy, or rather, if one associates democracy with fuzzy norms such as honesty, equal participation in power, and openness. Each of the three waves in Huntington's study are distinct from each other. The first wave developed slowly from 1828 to 1926, beginning in the United States, and was characterized by sunshine as minimal democracy, in which at least 50% of the adult male population was enfranchised and a responsible executive and periodic elections were in place. Now, make note of this, because this is something that I'm going to refer to later on. A reverse wave followed, spanning 1922 to 1942, beginning with Mussolini's March on Rome. Only 4 of the 17 countries that democratized after 1910 remained democracies during the first reverse wave. The second wave of democratization began during World War II, prompted by the victory of the Allies. So, program note, he's going from a wave in the direction going forward to democracy, and then there's a move, a reverse backwards away from democracy. Okay, so now he's illustrating the second wave going forward. The second wave of democratization began during the Second World War, prompted by the victory of the Allies, only to be usurped, as by the late 1950s political development and regime transitions were taking on heavily authoritarian cast. Let me read that again. Only to be usurped by the 1950s political development and regime transitions were taking on a heavily authoritarian cast. So that's around the world, not just in the United States. So this is a worldwide perspective. He does use an ethnocentric perspective of looking at it as an American, but he's looking out upon the rest of the world in doing this. This second reverse wave continued until the end of dictatorship in Portugal in 1974, signaled the beginning of the third wave of democratization, beginning in Europe and spreading worldwide as democracy seemed to take on the character of an almost irresistible global tide, moving on from one triumph to the other. In an effort to explain democratization, Huntington draws on some important observations. A 1959 study by Lipset highlighted the link between wealth and democracy. This study was tested by the World Bank in 1989, finding that out of 24 countries classified as high income, only 3 were non-democratic. Further, out of the 42 classified as poor, only 2 had any experience of democracy. Countries are unlikely to enter the political transition zone unless they develop at least a middle level of economic development. Similarly, religion is highlighted as democracy was especially scarce among countries that were predominantly Muslim, Buddhist, or Confucian. The ideal of the separation of the church and state, firstly in Protestantism and later in Catholicism, were instrumental in the democratization process. The demonstration effect also had an important part to play, particularly during the third wave. Those are demonstrations in the streets, okay? As the growth of communication enabled pressure to be levied on non-free nations. Solidarity's struggle in Poland had a resonance in Chile that would have been most likely in earlier decades. The triumphant analysis of the democratization process is given statistical weight as, according to Huntington, in 1973, 32% of the world's population lived in free countries. And in 1990, when the third wave was in full flow after the fall of the Berlin Wall, this figure rose from 32 to 39%. A later study in 1994 adds weight to Huntington's thesis, proclaiming that 58% of the world was democratic. It was heralded that authoritarian regimes had outgrown their populations as education and politicization expanded, and that modern liberal democracy was the only conceivable future. The bulwark that had stood firm against democracy, communism, was declared the grand failure by Brzezinski. Seemingly, the wave theory was empirically sound. However, a different interpretation of the evidence can also bring forward skepticism. The number of countries in the world had increased from 64 in 1922 to 130 in 1990, but almost exactly the same number of states as a ratio was democratic in 1990 as were in 1922, which was 45%. An effort to explain why no real increase in the ratio of democratic countries has occurred leads Huntington to uncover an important fact. 23 of 29 countries that became democratized during the third wave had previous experience with democracy. This diverse lot had little in common other than this factor. Furthermore, most of the countries with authoritarian systems in 1974 that did not democratize in 1990 had no previous experience with democracy. Perhaps what we are seeing, contrary to Fukuyama's premature predictions of the triumph of liberal democracy in 1989, is rather the consolidation of democracy in the areas of the world in which it is already familiar. Huntington also enthuses on the potential snowballing effect of democracy, but retains caution, stressing that a snowball can melt in unfavorable environments. Okay, we're almost done, folks. Such an unfavorable environment is clearly evident in the Middle East. Remember, this is in 1991. Huntington emphasizes a duality here, arguing that the Gulf War in 1991 would surely propel liberalization of the area. And the author here in 2010 parenthetically says, which it did not. So there was no movement towards democracy in the Middle East in 1991 and following. Okay, but also conceding that Islamic concepts of politics differ from and contradict the premises of democratic politics. Pakistan and Lebanon, given as examples, have been unable to uphold their democracies. Turkey remains the only exception. A half-century of Western interference in the Middle East has evidently also created a backlash, as any democratization there seems likely to produce new Islamic governments that would be much less willing to cooperate with the United States than are the current authoritarian rulers. Now take that into context to what's going on today. We certainly see that the Islamic governments are much less willing to cooperate with the United States, except the exception being the current authoritarian rulers. Look at what's going on in Qatar. Look what's going on in Saudi Arabia, in the United Arab Emirates, in Egypt. Authoritarian regimes are willing to cooperate with the United States, just as was predicted here. Okay? Iran is a striking example. Free elections are held in Iran, fulfilling the criteria of procedural democracy. But there is certainly little liberalization or civil rights as evidenced in the West in evidence. In other words, Iran may have elections, but they're certainly not a free society. Okay, continuing. Perhaps alienating the democratic process from other important factors is not always helpful. Elections alone are not enough. Huntington's American ethnocentrism leads him to assume that the democratization process will and should follow the American example, as other countries want to imitate the winning model. Failures of the United States would inevitably be seen as the failure of democracy. Recent ill-judged foreign policies and proven reports of widespread domestic electoral fraud, okay, this is in 2010. Domestic electoral fraud may now be signaling that failure. Okay, so that's kind of a prediction starting in 2010 by this thesis author. Another viewpoint highlights that the United States prosperity is based on a model of deficit spending. Okay, that's what I've been laying out for you the last several live streams talking about Libra and the new global currency, the deficit spending, the debt, the forgiveness, the jubilee, the forgiveness of debts, the debt reset worldwide. Let me read that again. Viewpoint highlights the United States prosperity is based on a model of deficit spending, which, quote, can be hazardous for economic health. Any attempt to promote this model, as Huntington does, should be accompanied with a bold-faced Surgeon General's warning. Bringing that point up to date, considering the collapse of the Western financial system in recent years, is all the more concerning for Huntington's thesis. Now, what he's referring to when he says collapse of the Western financial system in recent years, he's talking about in 2010 when he's authoring this thesis. He's referring to 2008, because that collapse was not just within, the mortgage industry of the United States. That had a ripple effect throughout Europe and even with China. Okay? So if you want more on that, you should look at derivatives. Okay? Very complex, but look at derivatives. Okay, continuing. By following a model that seeming cannot set an ideal example, nor rely on the capitalism that underlies it, The world's prospective democracies are surely in trouble. Okay, so I'm going to skip through. You get the point. There's quite a bit more. I wanted to keep it as short as possible. Here's what I want to offer to you, and I'm going to go back on camera. I know that's a mouthful there that I just read to you. Please take a look at the article on your own and read the balance of it as well. He talks about the third wave, so that's going forward to setting up democracies, waves of democracy, democratization of countries. Based on primarily economic development. People moving away from authoritarian, away from totalitarian, from dictatorship, because their standard of living is improving and thus their education and their communication capabilities are improving. They move towards democracy. Even China, which is still a communist country, still a dictatorship, certainly has become quite westernized. Now their economy is beginning to collapse already, but they have become distinctly westernized, very much more capitalistic. Of course, it all serves their military and their government. Without getting too far off on a tangent, we have the third wave as identified in 1991, but two reverse waves. Now, if you look at the Libra symbol, three waves, it would be easy to jump to the conclusion of saying, hey, maybe they're providing a new third wave towards democracy. But as one commentator in this world of alternative media used to say to me, not so fast, cousin. Kind of like John Wayne, not so fast there, Pilgrim. Not so fast, cousin. You don't have the whole picture. I want to share with you, Libra is not the third wave towards democratization. I've already given you the hints. I'm kind of playing with you a little bit. There are two reverse waves away from democratization towards fascism, authoritarian, dictatorship, one government, one leader. What I offer to you, not the third wave of democracy, the third wave of the reverse, the third reverse wave. That's the title of the book that I would write with Kathleen if we were going to do that on this topic, is say the third wave of reverse democratization is what Libra represents. That's your big takeaway, folks. Not hard to see, not hard to figure out for this group. You guys are great critical thinkers. You're highly intelligent. You put up with me for 2 hours because you're trying to learn what's going on, and I totally applaud you for sticking with us for 2 hours on a given day. So you see it as clear as we do. I shared with you this perspective of a third wave towards democracy that perhaps was relevant up until 1991, maybe the early 1990s, but certainly with the First and the Second Gulf Wars, we did not see a movement, a wave towards democratizing the Middle East, which is the focus of those dominoes that I've set up for you that are already falling. The dominoes are falling towards one world leader. That's a dictatorship. That's authoritarian. That's fascism. One world economic system with its own single global currency. That's Libra. With its own blockchain system. That's the infrastructure of the beast system. And all of this is fomented, all of the foundational, all of the founding members all of the organizations, all of the countries, all of the leaders, all of the business sector leaders, all of the financial leader sectors are all under the Concordia umbrella that I shared with you in the November issue of Entangled magazine. December is going to build upon November, and it's going to pull it together. Again, giving you the focus on nanodiamonds, but it pulls in those other components. So we now are viewing the tsunami, as I called it in my note to you regarding this live stream. We are witnessing the tsunami of the third wave of reverse democratization. And now it's not just a handful of countries. It's not 45, 55, 65% countries of the world going towards or pulling back from democracy. It's now the reverse wave away from democratization of the world. And that includes the United States, towards the fascism, the authoritarian one world government. That is the 180 of what I just presented to you. That's updating what I just presented to you. Published in 1991 and in 2010. It's clearly evident. Now, we as Christians, as children of God, we don't need to fear this. But we need to be looking out across the horizon as watchmen, seeing the tsunami wave coming in towards the shore, don't we? And it shows us how far the dominoes have already fallen, and the dominoes that are about next to fall in sequence. Now, we are not setting dates here, Kathleen and I. All we're doing is giving a seasonal reading. Call it a weather forecasting, as it indicates in Scripture. That, you know, you can read the weather, but you can't tell what's going on. You can't see what's before you. That's kind of my segue to Dane Wigington coming in and talking about geoengineering, weather forecasting. But we don't need to be fearful of this, but we need to understand how the time is progressing, and because we're using as one of our red flags out there before the tsunami is coming in. One of the flags we've planted in the seabed, in the sand, because as you know, with a tsunami, the water recedes far off coast and it reveals the seabed. So we've planted a red flag in the exposed seabed sand of the first half of next year, based upon the statements of when Libra is due to go online. Now again, that will be just in the business sector. That will be bringing all of the merchants online, preparing them for online transactions, because what is markedly different about Libra from all other cryptocurrencies is it is set up for transactions. The others are not. They're for speculative purposes. Some people want to claim that it's for investment purposes, but it's not. It's all speculative, because there are no reserve currencies, no metals behind the fiat cryptocurrencies right now. And they have fixed quantities of them. Therefore, by definition, they are fiat currencies, all cryptocurrencies. Those are all now going to be obsolete. And those in the cryptocurrency world know this. There is, and I'm calling this a tsunami because there is a huge wave of bankers, which includes the cryptocurrencies, because those are considered to be online banking functions, and the business sector at large, from the Amazon all the way down. All of those businesses and the individuals involved with them are rushing, like the tsunami coming to the shoreline, rushing towards Libra. Don't even be distracted by other cryptocurrencies that exist or may come online in the coming months, because they will all fall by the wayside. They will be overwhelmed by the tsunami of Libra. Again, don't be misled by the labeling of Libra as Facebook's cryptocurrency, because it is not. It's the Libra Association's cryptocurrency. That association is an inherent part of Concordia, and we've been encouraging you, Kathleen and myself, to do your own independent research. Now that we gave you the primer in November in Entangled, do your own in-depth research on Concordia, and it really begins to open up to you who the players are and why we are so convinced that this is the one world global currency. And now what I'm adding is the scholarly perspective on democracy, identifying the wave, because a wave will ebb and flow, high tide and low tide. It is now a third wave of reverse democratization. Now that third wave is enveloping the entire planet, not just a group of countries. This is why we've been saying national sovereignty, national borders, national currencies, even the euro, are obsolete. There will be no individual countries, and especially no individual currencies, sovereign or otherwise. There can't be. There's too much momentum behind this tidal wave. There are too many leading players behind Libra for it not to be. It's too far along in its development. I was warning you about this in January of this year. As you noticed on my YouTube channel, I've been posting all the live streams from 2018 and 2019. And I explained that in the last live stream because December 10th, YouTube is going to enforce what they call their evaluation of channels as to be, quote, commercially viable. So what I've done to make the channel viable is to provide them as many videos as possible that they can monetize for their benefit. Most of those videos have copyrighted music. It's only just been recently that Doug and I have been posting royalty-free music. I'll earn a few pennies off of those videos because it is remonetized. But all of those other videos for almost 3 years now all have copyrighted music, so I will not monetarily benefit from the posting of these. But I'm doing the 180, showing it to you. I'm doing the 180 on the censorship, and that's what commercial viability really is. We 180 those two words, and we see censorship. So to again 180 the censorship of YouTube, I made the decision to go public with all the live streams that you so generously have financially paid for. And I've gotten the sense from you as patrons that you're okay with this. Because to do otherwise, we run the risk of losing YouTube as our platform for live streaming. Doug and I have a plan B and a plan C of two other platforms, and we're even looking at others, but other platforms we can live stream through. The issue is one of people getting confused, people not knowing where we went to, people who don't participate in the live streams on a regular basis suddenly finding the Anthony Pat's channel is gone. And yeah, they could find us through Patreon, the patrons, but it just becomes cumbersome and it isn't convenient. So we're trying to stay on YouTube despite the censorship that's going on. But we have plans in place in case we get kicked off. So I appreciate you understanding the position that we're in of having to put all of these live streams up in a public fashion. But what it does is it demonstrates now to people who may have never been aware of the Patreon community and all the information that's been available to you as patrons. Now perhaps more people will become aware of it and go, wow, where have these guys been for so long? And you look back to January and February videos of just this year, and I was warning about Libra. And then in June, it was publicly announced by Facebook. It wasn't being called Libra's Facebook, or Facebook's Libra back in January and February. It was just Libra. And then in June, all of a sudden, it was announced through Zuckerberg and Facebook. That's just for marketing purposes, folks. They're doing that because Libra has such a huge database compared to the other players that are not publicly out there with their database, with their user numbers. Certainly MasterCard, Visa, PayPal have bigger databases of customers than Facebook does, but they're not really public in the social media way of looking at it. So they just hang the label for marketing of this is Facebook's cryptocurrency, when in fact it is not. They are one of 28 founding members. And as I said, watch for it. PayPal, Visa, MasterCard will come back to Libra. They went away because their stockholders needed to be educated, but they're going to come back once they've educated those folks. They have to. Everybody has to be part of Libra. Because if you don't, you're locked out of the beast system. You won't be able to buy or sell. Now, for you and I, we're not going to take the mark of the beast. We, Kathleen and I, are convinced that the Libra will at some point, not in the beginning, not in, the first half of 2020, because that'll be for the business sector to get established, but after that first half, they'll open it up for worldwide public transactions through Libra, and they'll allow people to exchange their sovereign currencies, like the US dollar, for Libras, and you won't have to take the mark of the beast in the initial stages. So hear me clearly. In the initial stages, Joe Bag of Donuts can go out and buy Libra sometime next year, probably the second half. But there will be a point, and I can't set a date, and I won't, because we don't do that. We've never attempted, never have set up, never tried to emulate ourselves as prophets. We're not. But certainly, in looking at the structure of the system, looking at the technical nuts and bolts of the Libra system and its blockchain, and understanding how it's constructed and how it will then function, it's clearly evident that at some point they're going to cut off access. Once they get people involved, see, the pattern has already been set up. You have the existing cryptocurrencies that have built out the infrastructure of the beast system, the blockchain, by enticing people through greed to build up fiat perceived wealth. Okay? Same thing will be reproduced again, recycled with Libra, getting people to cash in currencies for Libra. And there will even be cryptocurrencies to a small extent that will be allowed to be exchanged for Libras, a small sector. But again, the pattern here is getting people, because of their greed, to buy into this new cryptocurrency, jack up their perceived fiat currency wealth, and then cut them off. Problem, reaction, solution. You cut them off and you say, do you want access to your wealth as well as all of your private records that are in the healthcare records, etc., that are in the blockchain now? Do you want access? Well, the average Joe Bag of Donuts is going to say, well, of course. What do I have to do? Well, just take this mark. Then you can have your wealth and your private records, etc., etc. Problem, reaction, solution. It's all psychological. It's all based on greed. It's all based on fear, because at the brainstem level, there's no critical thinking going on. People are shifting to that fight or flight mode, that autonomic nervous system, that brainstem that I call it, the brainstem level of thinking. It's not the prefrontal cortex of critical thinking. It's all fear-based, emotional-driven. Again, brainstem, medulla oblongata, brainstem, fear-based, emotional. Yes, I'll take the mark of the beast. Bam. This is why we are talking about it so far ahead of time, and why you've understood this, why you've been with us, reading, researching, doing your own good Berean researching and vetting and critical thinking on your own. You see it plain as day, just like we do. We're just sharing this back and forth, back and forth. So we will not be sucked into this emotion-driven, fear-based decision-making process. We won't be. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I'm kind of getting the signal from Kathleen. Maybe there's a couple of things I need to address real quickly.
Well, first, Doug said that Dane will be calling you. Tell Anthony, please, that Dane will call him right at 8 o'clock Eastern on Skype. He's ready to go.
Okay.
So that's just a few minutes away. Andy made a statement, and he said, they're going to have some serious marketing to do to sell the idea of Libra. And I said, I wonder, Andy, they may just make a declaration. They've got enough backing behind them with all of these huge, huge corporations and so many countries already that have bought into this, that they may just make the declaration.
Well, that certainly fits into the scenario of the debt forgiveness, the debt reset, the jubilee, because the dominoes that I quickly laid out before was, we have the specter of war in the Middle East, which undoubtedly will cause an economic collapse, because you'll cut off the flow of oil, natural gas, economic collapse around the world. Problem, reaction, solution. Solution, one world currency. Because all the debts will be forgiven. When the economies collapse, the debts will be forgiven. That's the carrot to say, okay, we have the solution. We're just going to start over. Clean sheet of paper. Everybody will cheer. Oh, that's a great idea. Okay, but when we forgive the debts, there can only be one currency, because we've had currency speculations, fluctuations, we've had collapses of currencies, inflations and deflations, devaluations of currencies. We've had currencies based on metals and not on metals. So we're not going to do that. We're going to get rid of the debts. We're going to start over, but we have to have only one system, one currency, and it has to be digital. That's how it's going to play out. I absolutely am convinced that's how it's going to play out.
Mark just said Libra is supposed to mean justice, balance, and harmony. We are living in the upside down. And I said, it's just like what Anthony said, when you were reading. It's the third wave, but reverse.
Yep. And it's the third rider it's the third horseman of the apocalypse, right?
Well, it's funny. We'll talk more on Sunday because you have to get on with Dane. Yeah. But I was looking at several things spiritually, like what the Bible has to say about it. Was reading about what happened in Germany, and to me, this sounds like the days right before Germany and all of the madness that ensued.
Well,
it's primarily like we're right at that stage, right before.
Primarily because of their economic collapse.
Exactly.
That resulted in the hyperinflation of the German Deutschmark.
Yeah.
That was problem, reaction, solution. Solution was Hitler. So people know that history. I mean, most people do. And therefore, what they're going to say is, we're not going to allow what happened in Germany to take place worldwide. we're going to forgive the debts. So there is no hyperinflation. And because we don't want the fluctuation, speculation of the currency markets again, we're going to have one currency. Now, the last thing
They just cut out everything that we just said. Everybody said it's buffering and offline, offline, offline. So what we just said about Germany right now, we will repeat on Sunday.
Okay. We'll get into it on Sunday because we have just a few moments. Recognize they're not going to allow hyperinflation. They're going to use Germany as the backdrop excuse. And they'll go forward with debt forgiveness, debt reset, one world currency. Everybody will applaud it. The other thing about the third wave, the three, this is the counterfeit of the Holy Trinity. This is Satan's counterfeit of the Holy Trinity. 3. Okay. So, Doug, let's work on the technical. Doug, you want me to just wait for Dane? Okay. All right, I'm reading from Dane. He says, hello, Anthony. Good to go at 5 p.m. Pacific time. I will try to ring you at 5. That's 8 o'clock our time. If I don't hear back from you first, talk to you soon. So he's connected with us there. I'll wait for the phone call. It should be any moment now. And is Doug saying anything in the chat room to me, Kathleen?
No.
Okay.
No.
So Dane will be audio only if this works. It should. I see Skype is ready to go in the background here, and you should be able to just see and hear me, and then Dane will have his audio behind my image here. While we're waiting, again, here is some of the images from Dane's website, geoengineeringwatch.org. Here's a photo of Dane. I'll probably leave this up while he's talking and shuffle between some of these images just so that okay, lovely chemtrails that we all know and hate and despise and gets us all upset. So I'll put Dane's image up there. Like I said, this will be the first time on a live stream with Dane, but on previous broadcasts on a different platform than what we have here today, I've interviewed Dane twice, and then the third time was our... Okay. Hello, Dane. Are you there, sir?
Anthony, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Now, we're just setting up some technical things. I'm checking in the chat room to make sure that my live stream audience can hear you. Let me know in the chat room. Can you guys hear Dane? Dane, go ahead and talk a little bit.
I hope the audio is clear. Is this the mic? Can you tell me if the tapping, if you can hear that? I want to make sure I'm on the right mic. Hear that?
Yep, we can hear you just good. I can hear you.
Okay, so you hear that tapping, right?
Yep.
Okay, I'm on the correct mic then. Okay, good. Yeah, all set.
Chat room says you're great. You're good to go. I've got graphics up of you and also from your website. So welcome, Dane. You're in good hands here. You're in a very friendly audience here of highly well-informed people on your particular area of expertise. And they're excellent critical thinkers and researchers in their own right. We welcome you. This is really a privilege for our audience to hear from you. So I won't interrupt. I'll try not to interrupt, because when I have a guest on, it's your platform. You say what you would like to say as long as you would like to say it. The platform is yours. Go ahead, sir.
Well, it's a privilege and an honor to be here, Anthony. I appreciate your work very, very much as well. These are indeed strange days on planet Earth. The severity and immediacy of what's unfolding around us cannot be overstated, and that is the critical aspect of what the population needs to be awakened to: the ongoing weather warfare, aka geoengineering, solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, but all wrapped into what amounts to, at this point in time, the single greatest and most immediate threat we collectively face for numerous reasons short of nuclear cataclysm. But I want to answer any and all questions, Anthony, from any of your followers. Again, I'm grateful and honored to be here. And we're seeing, I'll make one point and then I'll toss this back to you. The aspect of climate engineering that unfortunately is still being overlooked by, or not acknowledged by, even many who are attempting to expose the issue, or at least are claiming to attempt to expose the issue, is the engineered winter weather aspect. And we have more than enough data to conclusively confirm this aspect of climate engineering, including samples or testing of samples of frozen precipitation that reveal all the elements that we would expect in an artificially nucleated element or nucleated precipitation, from urea to surfactants to aluminum, barium, strontium, polymer fibers. All of it is in the snow. We have independent lab testing to prove that. And so it's imperative that people acknowledge, if they're sincerely fighting climate engineering, this aspect of climate engineering must be acknowledged. There's no legitimate discussion about climate engineering without acknowledging the engineered winter events, the patented processes of chemical ice nucleation that go with that.
On the topic of winter, and I'll put it out to our live stream audience to prepare some questions for you, and they will be handled by my lovely wife, Kathleen. Say hi to Dane, Kathleen.
Hi, Dane. How are you?
Good, Kathleen. How are you? Very, very glad to be with you and Anthony.
Yes, I'm glad you're joining us. The audience loves to hear from you.
She's usually on camera with me, but tonight she's handling the chat room for us. So she'll gather the questions and we'll go forward. But let me post a question while we're waiting for them. In terms of the ice nucleation, we have seen winters in some areas of the world that have been worse and some that have not been quite as bad. And what's your prognostication for the United States in terms of this winter that we're entering into?
If you can post graphics, I'll send you one right now via email.
Okay.
And I think this would answer that question for me. What we see, let's look at October 25th or 2019, which we have the full month's records now. I think I have your email, Anthony. Yes. Okay. Coming through to you right now. This is a NASA GISS departure from normal high temperature map. And none of us have any love for these official agencies, but what we see from all official sources is not an over-reporting of temperatures, but an under-reporting in general. It's much warmer than is being stated. But that being said, this map coming through to you now, I'll send this to Doug Diamond as well, is for the entire month of October 2019. The globe is basically various shades of red that indicate above normal global temperatures. For the entire month of October, there's one blue departure from normal temperature to the downside, a less warm area in the entire globe. That is the North American continent. But that's not just been the case for October 2019. We see, in fact, for the last 5+ years, the most anomalously less warm place on the planet is parts of the North American continent, generally the most populated parts, the eastern half. That's not nature. That's climate engineering carried out by the world's largest military, bigger than the next 10 biggest militaries combined. Why would they do that? Because that has absolutely facilitated the fueling of the division and confusion of the U.S. population in regard to the true state of global climate collapse. And again, I know none of us, or certainly myself, I have no love for Al Gore. I am extraordinarily disappointed and frustrated in the so-called environmental community that has so far, because their leaders are in one way or another manipulated by the system itself, they will not acknowledge the climate engineering elephant in the equation. And that is truly hypocritical. It's criminal at this point. So if you can receive that map on an email, Anthony, I think that will paint a very clear picture.
Okay, I have it
To your
posted
question.
I have it posted for the audience right now. And if you want to break it down.
one thing?
Well, again, bottom line is nature would not create that kind of anomaly. And when we connect the dots of why there would be such an effort to cool the U.S. population, and what do we see right now from all official U.S. mainstream weather reporting, mainstream media, the cold, cold, cold. It's all we hear about. We don't hear about the record warm in Alaska, the weather whiplash events. Alaska just recently, a little over a week ago, had its record warm for the day and record snowfall same day. What do we see in Denver about 3 weeks ago? All-time record high of 85 degrees to 12 degrees in about 15 hours. 85 to 12. We just here in Northern California, we're about 20 inches short of precipitation for this season alone. That should have started in early September with rain. We're not in a big snow region here. It's most typically rain. We've had nothing for 7 months. We have official agencies like the U.S. Drought Monitor lying about the severity of the drought, not even categorizing us as being under any drought whatsoever, even though we have record low fuel moisture, record low soil moisture. They are pacifying the population by claiming officially that we are not even under drought. So we've had no precipitation until yesterday when it started snowing at 40, 42 or 43 degrees on top of the dust out here. Why is it snowing at 42 or 43 degrees? Because it's being artificially nucleated. And again, we have patents, Anthony, that state patents going back nearly a half century for artificial ice nucleation that state these processes can nucleate at temperatures up to 50 degrees or more. We know what's going on. We know the elements are in the precipitation. We have agencies or media like Fox News and Popular Science that actually covered the Chinese government doing this. Your listeners can search this. Search Chinese scientists create artificial snowstorm. In one case over Beijing, after the second or third time they nucleated and created frozen precipitation out of what should have been rain, they did $1 billion worth of damage to Beijing. They've since been more secretive about their activities, but if the Chinese government is doing this, why in the world would Americans think that our government is not?
Very true. And wasn't this also taking place in Australia?
We see chemical nucleation taking place everywhere. This is why you're seeing the radical temperature, weather, whiplash scenarios. And this is, again, a major aspect of climate engineering that we hope geoengineeringwatch.org has been the only source that has tried to bring this aspect of climate engineering to life.
Are you still there? Dane, are you still there? Okay, I think we just lost our Skype connection. We'll try to get Dane back here. He's not really much loved in the intelligence community. So I'm going to hang up this call on Skype just to let Doug know what I'm doing. And I'll await his dialing back into us.
Can I,
Yeah.
you know, there are a couple questions that they have in the chat room when Dane does finally come back on. But even tonight's news, you know, there was, they were talking about high winds coming in, you know, to Oregon and parts of California, 105 miles per hour winds coming off the ocean.
Off the ocean or coming from the inland Idaho, Denver direction?
You know what? I wasn't actually watching the direction. I thought it was off the ocean. They were saying 105 mile per hour winds. That's a Category 2 hurricane strength wind.
Yeah.
You know, and immediately I'm thinking, this is what God said about the winds and the seas raging.
Sure.
You know, I mean, this was, I don't know that it was bringing more precipitation with it, but I mean, those are devastating winds.
Yep. Well, this summer, as you know, with the fires, the winds predominantly, and when they're approaching that level of 100 miles an hour, those winds have been coming from the Idaho, Nevada, Denver, Colorado, New Mexico, off the desert regions, and coming in over the Sierra Nevadas and also the Santa Ana mountain range, the Santa Ana winds in Southern California. And I know that there still are large brush fires going on in Southern California right now, even though in the Sierras now, just started yesterday, they've started their annual snowfall, and they're expecting 3 to 4 feet in the higher elevations in the, let's say, above Sacramento, sort of in the Lake Tahoe region, just to give you a pinpoint. So that's an easy one. It doesn't look like Dane's going to be able to get back in. I think they're probably interfering with him. This happens on Skype all too often, and I apologize to the audience for this. It's very easy for them to interrupt any live stream, but especially Skype can be very erratic. So that may be it for Dane for this evening. I apologize. I know that he had said to Doug, and Doug relayed to me, that they were in Northern California. He is at the southern Oregon border. He's in Reno. That's not far from Lake Shasta and the Shasta volcanic mountain area. And of course, Shasta has a ski resort on it. Snow is not all that unusual. But in his location, in the Reno area, he's up in the foothills. They were getting snow. So Doug, can you let me know in the chat room, if you're not tied up with Dane, let me know in the chat room, Doug, if in fact he was having snow at his place in Reno. And if he was, that's very unusual. He was beginning to describe that earlier, that they normally get rain at his elevation. So if he was getting snow, you know, that's way out of the norm. So the question I was going to pose to Dane was, and we'll see. Oh, okay. Doug is saying Dane's whole computer just went blank and turned off. He's going to try to get back.
Glad we're not the only ones that have that happen.
Yeah, well, they attack him a lot.
This is whether they don't want out.
Right.
Information they don't want out.
One of the things I was going to ask Dane, in addition to your questions, was why? Why the governments around the world, which we know they're all either directly or indirectly working in terms of weather geoengineering and weather warfare. They live on this planet. Yeah, we can always talk about, you know, deep underground military bases, and all that good stuff. But why? Is it just to kill off the population and somehow the elites are going to survive underground? I think that's too simplistic of an explanation, and I know that would be too conspiratorial to ask Dane that question, because he is very much a researcher who sticks to the empirical process of just the facts, ma'am. And I totally respect that. And his research is par excellence. If you will go through the many videos that he has there, that Doug Diamond is responsible for producing with Dane. So Doug is his webmaster. He is also his video producer, his engineer. So the same thing that Doug does for me, but even more so for Dane, because he's much more involved in the editing of videos and the production of graphics and whatnot for Dane's videos than he is with me, because I'm not that graphic intensive and into a lot of editing. We just put out the live streams. But Doug does a fabulous job in supporting the research of Dane. And as Dane alluded to just before he was cut off, geoengineeringwatch.org is pretty much the only voice in the world that is putting out this empirical data. The real information, the real facts. All right, sir, welcome back.
Haven't had that happen before in many hundreds of interviews. Whole computer went black.
Welcome to our world.
It's my fault, because we are the ones that cause these disruptions just because of the spiritual aspect, and I don't expect you to go into that, but it's the spiritual aspect that interferes. So we apologize to you, our guest. Dane Wigington is our guest, and I would like you to go ahead and pick up where you left off, where you were talking about China and Australia and worldwide, the devastation and the swings in the temperatures that are occurring, and these really sort of whipsaw events that are going on.
Well, these weather whiplash scenarios are extraordinarily devastating to ecosystems, to human health. And again, we have a system, Anthony, that only knows how to double down on their insanity. So on top of all the sources of human damage to the planet, and I don't think we can rationally argue that the human race has been very poor stewards of the planet, but climate engineering being the single most destructive factor of all. And again, the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over. I mean, they're invested in the system. Their attempt to pacify populations until the last possible moment. So from the state of the climate to the collapse in global food production, and all the other red flags that should be there and should be visible for a population to understand that the current paradigm is in its death throes right now. But they're doing everything they can to mask that. So consider here in Northern California, again, or the west coast of the U.S., California in particular, but extraordinarily warm temperatures, constant warm, 65 degrees are the nighttime lows until just a few days ago. And yet just in time for the holidays, here comes our snowstorm. And this is an aspect of the weather warfare assault, in this case, the winter weather warfare, that when these events are carried out, especially over mass travel holidays like this, it creates maximum sensationalism, maximum impression on the population that how could it be warm anywhere when it's cold, cold, cold here? But I encourage listeners to look past their own immediate surroundings, to look at the global, larger picture, and again, places like Australia that are literally burning to the ground. We have now recent reports koala populations are functionally extinct. About 1,000 were just killed in recent fires. I mean, this is some horribly heart-wrenching videos of these poor koalas burning up. But this is just one harbinger. We had about 25 million acres in the Amazon go up. All of this feeds feedback mechanisms, and that's what's important for people to understand, Anthony. And I know you know this, but the equation we face is as non-linear as it could possibly be. We have about 50 to 60 feedback loops in place right now. One example of a feedback loop, probably the most dire, is the methane hydrate and clathrate releases from formerly frozen methane deposits in tundra and on the seafloor. And Anthony, I'm not sure if your listeners may have ever seen, if they search methane craters Siberia, they'll see truly astounding images of parts of the Yamal Peninsula that look like a nuclear exchange took place. Massive circular methane craters as this methane is thawing and literally exploding into the atmosphere. And methane is 100 to 120 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. We have nitrous oxide on top of that. So we have what is already scientifically termed a runaway climate collapse. Climate engineering trying to mask that from the populations at the cost of making the overall situation worse, not better. Trying to, again, pacify populations to keep them from panicking until the last possible moment.
I was saying to the audience that I would pose this question to you, and that is, why?
One reason why is what I just stated. Again, to keep populations from panicking. This is to mask the severity of climate collapse in order to keep business as usual. And this is a part of the equation that is typically missed. I mean, we can, by an unfortunate amount of even those who know this is occurring, yes, we have weather warfare going on, absolutely. Do those in power benefit from a population that's being sickened steadily due to the contamination of our air column from highly toxic nano heavy metal particulates, polymer particulates? Yes, those in power benefit from a population that is getting sicker and dumber by the day. But on the larger horizon, we have done very real and irreparable damage to the planet and continue to do more so every day. Those in power know that if the population understands and wakes up to the fact that the current paradigm is absolutely in its death throes, that population could alter the equation even at this late hour in ways that the power structure does not want. They want to retain their control until the last possible moment. And again, a population that wakes up to the fact that the human race mathematically in the current course will not be here much longer. We will likely take the entire web of life down with us if we continue on the current course. So again, there's extraordinary motivation by those in power to try to shield that understanding from the population till the last possible moment, giving them more time to maneuver and prepare for what's coming. But again, all the while, every single day that business as usual continues on diminishes our chances for salvaging any part of Earth's life support systems. And I know that's very difficult information for most to even begin to accept. But accept it we must one way or the other. We can accept it well or poorly, but if we have statistical data to back this up, and then we need to include this in the equation. And going back almost 10 years, geoengineeringwatch.org, I think, was the first major source based on our working with former government scientists, Fish and Game and Forest Service, to state on the record that insect populations were collapsing globally, 80 to 90% collapse of terrestrial and aquatic insects. And academia rolled their eyes and walked away from that, but they've now had to acknowledge it. Why? Because they can't hide it any longer. Now we have some in academia, very few, that are acknowledging the inevitability of societal collapse. If the biosphere collapses, society will collapse. And we have some acknowledgement from some in academia now on that inevitable conclusion if we remain in the current course, Anthony, but we have the majority of academia simply refusing to look at that data because that conclusion is simply unacceptable for academia. So we have so many academia literally ignoring reality, ignoring the truth on so many fronts. And again, the climate engineering issue is most profound, Anthony, because I know you know how visible can it be, how obvious can it be that this is going on, and yet we have the climate science community telling us that if geoengineering programs were to be deployed, it would look exactly like what we see in the sky, but yet they tell us we're not seeing what we're seeing. So think of the absurdity of that.
What can the powers that be that are orchestrating this, what can they do to protect themselves? How do they get out of this? How do they save their own skin, to put it in a very raw format?
Well, that's a common question, and certainly understandable that people would ask it. One, why would they do this to themselves? And I'll get to your part of the question in a moment, but I would cite again all the examples of what those in power have facilitated and orchestrated already that has irreparably contaminated the entire web of life, including them, the nuclear bomb detonations, over 2,000 that have contaminated the entire planet, Fukushima, an ELE extinction level event on its own, if other factors don't take us out first, which I would argue will be the case. But we know that those in power at the top, based on psychoanalysis, have certain deficiencies. Whatever evil genius they have deficiencies, and one of those, a common thread with various forms of their mental conditions, again, is a near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. So we have, again, those at the top echelon of power behaving like a cancer that wants only to proliferate their power. Host eventually dies. In this case, the host is planet Earth. How would they protect themselves? In the short term, we have enough data to confirm that there are chelation facilities that are the most high-tech that can cleanse the blood. It is likely those in power are having much of this contamination taken from their system through these processes that they might need to do perhaps once a year in order to chelate enough metal out of their system to avoid some of the consequences the rest of us are going to suffer with being exposed to this contamination and other forms of contamination too. I'm not focusing everything on climate engineering, but in the long term, that's the bigger question. Can they survive on the current course? The answer is no. We are absolutely on track for what would be scientifically termed Venus syndrome. That doesn't mean definitively that that's what will happen. And the term is not a metaphor. It means that on the current course, based on available data, it appears that we are on track for what appears to have happened on Venus, where there are so many feedback loops that once triggered cannot be shut off. Oceans eventually boil into the atmosphere, and the atmosphere becomes, as in the case of Venus, 100 times more dense than Earth. Heat gets in, doesn't get out. So Venus is 900 plus degrees on the surface. And many people, Anthony, don't know or realize that all things being equal, Venus would only be 20 plus degrees warmer than Earth because of its proximity to the sun. That's not much. And we have, from the pre-industrial baseline temperatures, we have already advanced some 7 degrees Fahrenheit, or a little about 6.5 or 6 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 3.5 degrees C, toward that 20 degree mark. So we're already partway across this divide of turning our planet into Venus. And the current rate of heating, Anthony, is statistically equivalent to the thermal energy contained in 4 to 5 Hiroshima bombs per second on our planet. Wow. That's how fast the planet is heating. That's about 400,000 per day. Again, the thermal energy equivalent. So we're in a runaway train. The temperatures reflect that. Everywhere we check those temperatures, other than the artificially nucleated zones, which again we see in every case temperatures falsified to the downside, which is masking the true severity of warming. And what I ask people to do, again, especially those in the U.S. that are in these engineered cool down zones with chemically ice nucleated moisture, look at the wider horizon. Look at the headlines from around the globe that they're not seeing while they're showing us the political idiocy every day on every mainstream station.
What's the possibility that all of this activity is somehow, and I know it's insane activity, but is there any possibility that this is being used to somehow mitigate the effects, natural, if you will, the natural effects of the migration of the northern and southern poles, the migration towards the magnetic pole shift of the planet?
Poles are certainly migrating, and the pace of that migrating is accelerating, as I know you know. And if we look at that scenario, or we look at another scenario that many ponder, for example, the solar minimum, does that statistically add up to what we see, or any need for them to mitigate in this way? And the answer, based on available data, is no. For example, if we look at previous, let's take the solar minimum, for example, like the Maunder minimum, the total diminishment of solar irradiance was about 0.25%. 1/400th. It is virtually insignificant against the backdrop of what we have done as human beings to the planet. The depositing of 100 million tons of CO2 in the atmosphere a day, and although people tend to try to overemphasize the fact that CO2 is necessary, of course it is, but changes at this pace inhibit all life forms from being able to adapt. The current rate of change, and this is what's most important to consider, Anthony, if we compare to any previous paleo event, whether it's pole migration, pole shift, solar minimums, any previous paleo event in Earth's 4.5 billion year history, statistically speaking, the current rate of change is very conservatively happening at 170 times the rate of any previous event. And that translates to a statistical equation that indicates clearly that the statistical possibility of these changes being anything other than anthropogenically caused is a statistical zero. So it's not to deny that these other factors occur. It's not a denial of solar minimums, not a denial of pole migration, but it's simply saying, again, an example I give often because I think it's clear. If you find a body in the street that's been run over, beaten, shot, stabbed, and then you try to claim that individual died of a heart attack, you'd have a hard time making that argument. And I think we need to look at it in the same way, that there's the changes that are happening on the planet, specific cause and effect, and we can't ignore that. So we cannot attribute these changes to anything other than anthropogenic activity at this point, because the Earth was entering a cooling phase before pre-industrial or before industrial activity began in earnest. It was in the elliptical phase of its orbit. Should have started slowly descending into a cooling phase again, but that's been completely negated, and now we are blowing past all barriers into, again, an abrupt climate collapse.
We're 170% into this. If there were a global awakening, what would the target be for the global population to focus upon as an activist group? What could scientifically be done to mitigate the direction we're heading?
That's an extraordinarily important question. It has many layers to it. One, why does reaching a critical mass matter so much? Why is that so important? And I would argue this: the only chance we have of stopping these programs is from the inside out. We can't go up against the U.S. military. We have to have them on our side. So by reaching a critical mass where military families, military members, and families and subcontractors that are participating in these programs, so that they all understand that they are literally participating in their own demise. If we can reach a critical mass, we would have a chance, I would argue, of stopping these programs from the inside out, which is the only way they will be stopped. In regard to what we can yet do, from a technology standpoint, technology so far has done nothing but ensure we are on a path for certain near-term global omnicide. Nature, by contrast, has always sustained and rejuvenated. And we see these elaborate schemes still coming from academia, these techno fixes that, again, climate engineering is one that is considered a techno fix. The climate science community pretending it's just a proposal when it's been a lethal reality for 70 years already. And now they're adding more layers to that. So when we look at the quote techno fixes, climate engineering being the single greatest causal factor for ozone layer collapse, which, by the way, mathematically speaking, based on measurements taken by a former NASA contract engineer that has worked directly for geoengineeringwatch.org with equipment we supplied him, at the current rate of loss, statistically, it appears total ozone layer collapse will likely occur 2025 or 2026, game over for all terrestrial life, if we remain on the current course. So what has the military-industrial complex done to try to mitigate, for example, methane in the atmosphere, which is increasing the heating and, again, increasing the ozone collapse as well, to nuke it, to microwave it with Project Lucy and Project Alamo, two acronyms for microwaving the atmosphere with opposing frequencies to try to molecularly degrade the methane. Just giving an example of one layer of insanity of techno-fix heaped on another, on top of another. We have other elements in the climate science community that have suggested putting 10 million wind-powered water pumps in the Arctic to pump some of the colder seafloor water to the surface to try to refreeze the ice. Well, what does that do? It allows warmer water to reach the seabed, which more rapidly thaws the methane I've made mention of already,
Yep.
which further fuels the overall warming of the planet. I mean, we have a climate science community that is living in some sort of alternate reality that if we continue on this course, we're done. Now, if we look at, if they truly wanted to sequester carbon, what happened to trees? If trees could still grow, and again, the conditions are becoming so harsh that replanting trees does no good because they don't grow anymore. But we have these mechanisms from nature, from creation, that have been profoundly effective at sustaining life, and yet that's ignored by the climate science community because it's bad for business for them. So we have so many people in academia, Anthony, that are simply pursuing their paychecks and pensions, and they either know or don't know whatever they're paid to know or not know, and that's the fact of the matter. And if we continue on this course, it's game over in the very near term.
Yeah, the grant money machine is something that I tear apart quite a bit on these live streams, and certainly what you just said about paycheck to paycheck, they're more concerned about their careers. Let me ask you this then, on the heels of what you just said. It's not a technological solution. So the scenario I pose to you is, if there were sufficient people that were engaged working from within, as you say, and the population endorsing, motivating, encouraging that working from within, if there was an opportunity to shut off all of the technology that's being applied with respect to geoengineering, if we shut down the machine, is there a chance that nature could still recover the planet?
I think we have to frame that in a time frame sense, in that, are we past the point of no return to the thriving planet we have formerly known? Yes, the answer is yes. We probably passed that point 2 decades ago. The equilibrium period, based on previous paleo events that were not nearly as severe as what's happening now. An example I often cite is the Pedum event, the Paleocene, Eocene thermal maximum 55 million years ago, equilibrium period afterward 10 to 20 million years. So we're talking about extraordinary time frames, for, in a geologic sense, not so long, but in regard to the human time scale, extraordinarily long. So in any time frame that matters, we will not know the planet we have previously known, short of some outside factor or force that is as of yet unseen. Now, that being said, can we still salvage some of the planet's life support systems? And the answer is, I hope so. I certainly think that's worth fighting for. If there's any chance that we can salvage anything, that's worth fighting for. We face what the geoengineers would have us believe, this, Anthony, that once you start climate engineering, you can never stop. Stopping would be termed, or the scientific community has termed this, double catastrophe scenario. If your listeners search geoengineeringwatch.org, double catastrophe scenario, they'll find a full post on this. I would argue that argument is like saying that an addict can never quit and must continually increase his dosage. And is that true? No. An addict, if he wants to survive, no matter how brutal the withdrawal is, must stop. And I would argue the same is true with climate engineering, although the pressure built up in the climate system is immense and at this point unknown. We are in completely uncharted territory. We do not know how profound the planet's life support response would be if we could free it, as you stated or asked. If we could free it from the climate engineering straitjacket, how profound would that life support response be? We don't know. And again, I would argue this territory is so uncharted that no academician or no academic panel can answer this question. And even if we can shut down climate engineering, all other forms of human activity that are damaging the Earth's energy balance must also be shut down. And this is what society is not yet willing to accept. I'm sorry about that background noise. Hang on, I'll try to get at that.
It's okay. Is there an opportunity for any locations on the planet to become an oasis for humanity to survive? Could pockets be designated as, well, let's call it a safe zone?
That's a question that we can't answer yet. I mean, certainly at the current rate of warming, let's look again at the Pedum event that happened 55 million years ago. You had terrestrial temperatures in the equatorial zones of about 140 degrees, certainly not habitable. Ocean temperatures 105 to 110, also dead zones. So you had only regions near the poles that were habitable. Certainly at minimum, we are on course for that type of scenario. And I can't stress the non-linear nature of what's unfolding. And this is where so many, not just in academia, but in the population, have been trained to believe you can look at a chart, look backwards, and say, well, it's taken this much time to reach this point, it'll take that much time to reach that point. That is absolutely not applicable in this equation. We are free falling off the 100th story of the building free falling toward the sidewalk. The human race has been led to believe we're flying. We're not flying. We're falling, and the sidewalk is the next stop. So we are perilously close to a total collapse. And this is where the equation gets more complex, Anthony. It's not that, even as severe as things are, it's not that the planet stops supporting life overnight. Again, although that point is close. But once the power structure realizes they can't hide the severity of what's unfolding from the population any longer, what cards will they play? Whether it's nuclear war or some massive false flag event that would allow them to implement martial law, we can't know, but all of those wheels are certainly turning as well. In regard to a nuclear exchange, this is another question that should be answered, or asked, I should say. Are those in power, and I refer to not just the US, China, Russia, and the rest, they're all colluding and cooperating on climate engineering. We know this. We have 800-page Senate documents to outline international cooperation. None of these programs could be conducted without the full cooperation of governments, either actively or passively, all over the world. So are they desperate enough, or will they become desperate enough to intentionally trigger a nuclear exchange in a last-ditch effort to try to block out enough of the sun to stay off, again, Venus syndrome for a bit longer?
So
are they that desperate?
You're talking about a nuclear winter.
Correct. Correct. So, that may be a final card they would try to play. And that would be very unfortunate, in that if that would eliminate any chance we would have to shut down these operations, shut down other forms of human activity, air travel, period, all forms of human activity that are damaging the Earth's protective atmospheric layers, altering the energy balance of the planet. If we can shut down all of those types of destructive human activities that are derailing Earth's life support systems, if we can do that and allow the planet to respond, I would argue that is the best chance we have to, at minimum, buy time.
So just to make sure I'm on track with you, the nuclear winter scenario would be a positive?
No, sir.
Okay.
Not saying that at all. I'm saying, again, I hope that doesn't happen, so I can make that clear. I'm saying the power structure may be desperate enough to attempt that.
Right.
Yeah, but I'm absolutely not saying that would be a positive.
Okay.
Any layer of insanity heaped on another layer of insanity only adds to the overall
quadrupling of it.
Exactly.
Let me have a little bit of time here for questions from the audience, if I may. Is that okay?
Certainly.
Okay.
Before I give you a few questions, Dane, what you have been saying and what Anthony just said, referencing nuclear winter, I know in Matthew 24, it says, "Pray that your escape may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. For at that time there will be great tribulation, the kind that has not taken place from the beginning of the world until now, and never will again. Unless those days were limited, no one would survive. But those days will be limited because of the elect." It says, and then you come down to the 29th verse, and it says, "Immediately after this tribulation." Now, this doesn't necessarily mean the tribulation in the sense of the most popular sense of the word tribulation, meaning, this event that takes place. Tribulation, when we look at that word, it means a cause of great trouble or suffering, a state of great trouble or suffering. And certainly weather of this kind can do that. And it says, immediately following, all of this tribulation in these days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not shed its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the celestial powers will be shaken. But if I were to go back real quick to the where it says, "Pray that your escape may not be in winter or on the Sabbath." I've been in Israel, and I know that on the Sabbath, absolutely everything shuts down. You can't even find a taxi unless you want to pay quadruple the price to get you somewhere. Everything shuts down. All access to everything on the Sabbath shuts down. So when they say, "Pray that your escape may not be in winter," it means because there'll be avenues that you would normally take that will be cut off, you won't have access to. So this weather, fabrication that they are bringing about is going to cause great tribulation. We're seeing it now with the massive fires, the winds, the coastal flooding. And, if these winds become something, as God says they will, raging, it's going to push the ocean water onto these coastal cities. The cities are going to become flooded. We're talking about sea levels rising as it is, but if heavy, high winds, like what they're experiencing in Oregon right now, 105 mile per hour winds, that's going to push these currents, that are going to flood the cities. Yep. Even before the ocean levels start rising to even more notable levels. But
let's let Dane respond to that. I don't mean to push, you into that direction, because I know that's not a direction you normally address. But just your reaction, Dane.
Well, certainly. I appreciate the question, and I acknowledge that does biblical scripture seem to allude to such events? Yes.
Yes, it does.
Do we have other sources that have as well? Yes. We look at the Hopi prophecies from the Hopi Indians. They said in the time of great change there would be cobwebs spun in the sky. Indeed, the aircraft spraying a trail looks very much like a spider spinning a web in the sky. Our skies look like they're filled with cobwebs, if you will. And the position of many of the spiritual leaders that I've spoken to from many traditions have unfortunately been this, that there's no need. In fact, some didn't want even our most credible printed scientifically based data from geoengineeringwatch.org. What I've been told numerous times is this: we don't need to worry about the situation, it's all in big hands. And I would challenge them, especially in the case of Christianity, and I'm not faulting Christianity at all, but I'm saying some of these leaders are hiding behind their pulpits and protecting their 501c3s, because what I have quoted back to them, there is nowhere in Scripture, not just with Christianity, but other major traditions, that says that we can sit down and do nothing in the face of such atrocities. We are required to do our best to stand against that kind of evil, this kind of evil in our skies, until we're relieved from our post, period. So
Agreed, wholeheartedly.
And that thank you, Anthony, and I appreciate both of you. And so I hope that congregations would consider those types of profound prophecies that you've just outlined and respond to them, and do everything they can to hold their leaders, their pastors, accountable, that we are required to be good stewards of the planet until we're relieved from our post, period. And if we do that, who can say what good we may yet do? And that's all that's ever been required of any of us, is to do our best with what we've been given. Scripture would state that as well.
Yep.
So, that is, again, what we are trying to do, and that is much of what I feel. I've spent the last 20 years of my life engaged in this battle. My life as it was stopped 20 years ago when I realized this was happening, and I could not do otherwise than what I am doing right now. I could not face myself in the mirror, couldn't face my children, and certainly couldn't face my Maker if I wasn't 100% engaged in this battle till my last breath.
We would both, Kathleen and myself, echo exactly and endorse what you're saying. Absolutely. I do want to take a question from the audience here, so Kathleen's going to read to you here.
Okay. In spite of the lack of obvious geoengineering here in Australia, is our chaotic weather a result of northern hemispheric engineering projects?
Well, certainly, anytime you affect the planetary system, you affect the whole of the system. But that being said, I'm not sure where their location is in Australia, but we have many very profound photographs, recent photographs from Australia of very glaring and blatant atmospheric spraying. Now, in Australia, as they're entering summer, they're likely to see some of the conditions we see in some of the places in the U.S. where the visible horizon-to-horizon trails are less frequent. but yet the skies are hazy, silvery white. We see short, bright trails. There's certainly much less atmospheric RH, relative humidity, so the very blatant trails are not as prevalent, but they're still there. We have images from everywhere from Antarctica, South America, horrible atmospheric aerosol operations. So again, they may be an area where they're only looking for the long, linear, obvious dispersions, but there's much more to the issue than that, and there's nowhere to escape the effect of these operations. So it's something that the entire planetary system is being disrupted at this point. Nowhere to hide.
Okay.
This one is a comment from someone who said that the early snow here froze the leaves on the trees while they were still green and changing to autumn colors. The green leaves are still on the trees. Very concerning.
Very good observation. Two points there. One, could the scenario described be occurring? Absolutely, yes. When the chemical and nucleated material is extraordinarily cold to the touch. We tested snow in early fall in Mount Shasta, where the temperatures had not yet been below 30 degrees, but yet the snow itself was 16 degrees. How does that happen?
Oh, man.
So again, it's chemical ice nucleation that creates this sort of cool down. It's an endothermic reaction for your listeners, so they understand. We know what they may know what an exothermic reaction is when you release energy, i.e., explosions or so forth. But an endothermic reaction, energy absorbing. I know you know what this is, Anthony, but very profound effects with the right elements. You can freeze water in a beaker instantly. We have lab tests on geoengineeringwatch.org to show that demonstration. So we have chemical ice nucleation elements being used on sea surfaces. That's what's statistically hiding what is almost an ice-free Arctic right now, only slush on the surface. We see if your listeners haven't seen the frozen ice balls, if they search geoengineeringwatch.org engineering winter, they'll find a whole category on this. But if they search ice balls Lake Michigan, they'll see, for example, 75-pound perfectly spherical ice balls covering the shores of Lake Michigan. It's happened in countless other places around the globe as well, the Baltic Sea and so forth. And we've seen this occur in Lake Michigan with water temperatures over 40 degrees. How does that happen? Chemical ice nucleation. So these same elements on foliage absolutely can kill them and have the effect that she described. Now, we also have seen since 2010, at least in the Pacific Northwest, after specific rains in the fall, we see the leaves on many of the deciduous trees days after specific rain events will completely brown out, dead, and hang on the trees without cold temperatures, without at least visible chemical ice nucleation. We believe a defoliant is also being used. This is when the leaves die in the tree and hang there. That is not nature. That is not the abscission hormone releasing that leaf. And we see these trees, or many trees in many locations, fully foliated with dead leaves through the entire winter. We know that our government was able to defoliate jungles 50 years ago. They certainly have the capability now. We've had large-scale commercial farmers in California using these type of defoliants to force trees into dormancy for many years now in California because it's not cold enough for the trees to enter dormancy soon enough, so they're forcing them into dormancy. And why would the climate engineers do this? Because people were beginning to wonder prior to 2010, especially here in Northern California and other places, it would be January and February, and the deciduous trees had not lost their leaves. And people start to question that. So they can create the change of season, and people forget very quickly that that's not what trees did. The leaves don't die and hang on the tree.
Right.
So to them, it looks like winter, tree full of dead leaves, but that's not nature. So anyway, to answer the question, could the chemical ice nucleation elements do that? Yes, as could some form of defoliant in the fall mix as well, but both could be a part of the equation.
I had not heard about the defoliant part of that equation. That is, it's demonic. It's the only thing I can say.
Well,
it's demonic. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just saying it. It's again. Scripture confirms what exactly is happening here when we talked about the changing of the times and the seasons.
Yep.
Times not meaning the clock, the physical clock, but the way in which we live and the manner in which we live.
Right.
And now the seasons.
Quite literally.
Quite literally, based upon what you just said. So, yeah, it's very eye-opening. I have another question. Since the government is trying to push the global warming agenda, why would they artificially create cold weather and not warm? Also, how does the grand solar minimum fit into this research? Fit into your research?
Okay, let me get to the global warming question first. Okay. Must consider, although there has been considerable effort to create the appearance that they are trying to exaggerate the warming to the planet, the exact opposite is true. In fact, the climate science community, and I know many in that community, they are not allowed to state the true severity of what they feel is unfolding. But by, again, very elaborate orchestration of public opinion, manufacturing that opinion, many are under the impression that those in the climate science community are somehow rewarded if they exaggerate the severity of what's unfolding. Again, the exact opposite is true. Let's look at the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the largest scientific panel ever created on any subject in human history. Nearly 2,000 climate scientists. All of their data is profoundly conservative. All of their estimates of what would happen or what will happen are profoundly conservative. And we see that now. In fact, let's look at the Arctic ice. The estimation of an ice-free Arctic in the summer was originally 2100, then 2075, 2050, now 2030. I would argue it is likely, even with climate engineering, which has delayed it for probably a decade already, at the cost of making the overall planet warmer, I would argue we will likely have it's very possible we'll have a blue ocean event, which means an ice-free Arctic at the end of the melt season next year. Everything changes at that point to a degree that we can only speculate on, but the runaway collapse we are already facing will get exponentially worse. So again, the opposite is true. The climate science community has not been allowed to state the true severity of what's unfolding. And we see that. Look at who would gain from that. The fossil fuel industry or the hydrocarbon industry, military industrial complex, global power structures who want to keep the current paradigm going. We have car manufacturers literally manufacturing cars they can't sell, putting them on lots empty, lots with cars as far as the eye can see in order to keep the machine moving, in order to keep business as usual. And all this feeds into that equation. And how much, quote, climate denialism do we have? Again, I think it comes down to this. From whatever person's perspective is on the climate or the state of the climate, this question: can we have any legitimate discussion about the climate from any perspective without first and foremost addressing climate engineering? And for all those in the environmental and global warming communities who point the finger at the global warming deniers, I would point the finger right back at them and ask them this question again. Is their denial of climate engineering any different than those who deny that we have been poor stewards of the planet and damaged the planet? And I would argue the answer is no. There's more than enough denial to go around. In regard to the solar minimums, again, can't stress enough. We need to look at facts, not just unsource referenced statements from certain sites that push a certain agenda, sites that do not acknowledge the engineered cooldowns and that pretend those engineered cooldowns are somehow a sign of a solar minimum. And that is a blatant, glaring lie. So if we look at statistical facts, Maunder minimum, which is the major solar minimum that's often referred to, statistically, 0.25% reduction in solar irradiance. That's 1/400th. It's virtually meaningless against the backdrop of the damage the human race has done to the planet. So just asking people to look at those facts, and those facts, again, don't mean that the poles aren't migrating, doesn't mean that there's a period in reduced solar activity. It just means we have to put this in statistical form. And when you put it in that form, the mountain of damage the human race has caused to the planet completely obliterates any other natural processes.
Understood. You made mention that next year there will be zero polar ice in the
I said
ocean.
probability of.
Probability.
Again, because they have so far statistically hidden that.
Sure.
And here's how they statistically hide that. The climate science community now considers any area of the Arctic Ocean with 15% of slush or more as ice pack. Is that not still 85% ocean? It is.
Yeah.
But they consider it ice pack. They show it on the modeling as ice pack. Consider this, Anthony and Kathleen, 95% of the multi-year ice in the Arctic is gone. 95%. We see only slush. And consider this as well. This is a very interesting photo that we found in the Naval Archives. We found, and this is in our 20-page fact and photo summary booklet. That's our primary awareness tool. In February of 1959, 2 U.S. military submarines surfaced at the North Pole in open water in the middle of winter in 1959. And with climate engineering and chemical ice nucleation operations, they've been able to statistically hide that. In fact, let me point out something else that might help connect these dots. We saw global temperature rises start to go straight up right at the end of World War II. That's when climate engineering was fully deployed at scale. And Anthony and Kathleen, you probably remember or have heard or seen that there was a leveling off of temperatures from 1945 to about 1975 that had this part of the science community scratching their heads, and even the discussion of, we don't know what's happening. Could we be entering another ice age? Do you remember that era?
Yes.
What we have is climate engineering initially having a very profound effect, and we don't know how much was an actual effect or how much was a statistical manipulation, but that was certainly directly connected to climate engineering. But after all the negative consequences kick in, i.e. ozone destruction, a drying out of the atmosphere, a reduction of Earth's natural cloud cover, what did they do at the end of the 70s? They started to ramp the programs up again, because it's like a drug addict that has to keep upping his dose because the former dose is no longer doing the job.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
So what do we see in 1998? As the temperatures began to rise rapidly, 1998, by far the warmest year ever recorded at that point in time. Immediately after 1998, we had the term climate change implemented instead of global warming.
Yep.
Why would they do that? Because they knew they were going to ramp the programs up even further. They knew they were going to be causing these radical weather whiplash scenarios with chemical ice nucleation. They had to have a term that would make the public accept that must be a normal part of this process. These radical temperature swings were just climate change and not just global warming. So again, you see this very elaborate effort to try to continue to manipulate public opinion, to mask the severity of what's unfolding for as long as possible, and this all the time staying on a track with these programs that amount to, and I want to say this to both of you because I believe you'll relate, can there be any greater form of betrayal and hubris than playing God with creation's life support systems? And that's exactly what they're doing. So again, these programs must be a priority issue for us all, or very soon. Exposing and stopping these programs must be a priority, or very soon nothing else will matter.
One quick question. With the ice slush and the 95% loss of the ice pack, do you expect any further rise in sea level along the coastlines?
Okay, let me reframe that. It's a 95% loss of the multi-year ice.
Okay.
It's not a 95% loss of the overall extent. So we have the ice extent, which is the surface area, and the ice volume, or the mass. So of the multi-year ice, 95% loss. Of the extent, it's a much lesser figure, but again, it's mostly surface slush. And we've seen this slush. You guys remember when all the headlines on the Boston record snow and so forth, and we had slush iced over parts of the Boston harbor with sea temperatures of 40 degrees. How
Yep.
does that happen? How do you have ice floating on a harbor that has 40-degree water when ocean water freezes at 28.4 degrees?
Yeah.
These are vast differences, but those create headlines that make people think, how could there be any global warming? Look at these photographs. It's so cold outside. We have pilots telling us that they're seeing, in some cases, 20 or 30-degree temperature rises. These are commercial pilots we're communicating with behind the scenes when they're 1,000 feet plus up off the deck. Immediate temperature rise because this cold air sits on the surface, just like in the freezer of the market. That's an open freezer. Cold air sits there. It's dense, and it works for the headlines they want to create. So back to the Arctic ice again. There's a very strong probability that by September 2019 we will have a statistical ice-free Arctic in the summer. It doesn't mean there won't be some refreezing in the winter, but it means at that point everything goes exponential. Let me put that into statistical terms. It's believed there's enough methane on the seafloor, frozen methane hydrate and clathrate, to turn the planet into Venus many times over, as much as 10,000 gigatons. If 1/2 of 1% of that releases, that's what's 1/200th. That would be a 400% increase in the overall greenhouse gas forcing effect on the planet. 1/2 of 1%, and that's that area alone. So again, the severity of what we face must be understood. It's necessary when understanding why they would do this. Now, in addition to trying to mask the severity of what's unfolding, again, weather is being used as a weapon all over the globe. Anthony and Kathleen, let's look at General Wesley Clark. 1 week after 9/11, you guys have both probably seen him say or outline the countries that were to be targeted right after 9/11, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably. I apologize. Let's fix that. Is it a coincidence that every one of those Middle Eastern countries has undergone a once in 1,000 year drought, destabilizing those countries since? That's not nature. It's climate engineering, cutting off their precipitation. We had leaders of these countries on the floor of the UN stating so. In the case of Iran, stating their precipitation was being cut off by NATO weather modification. So we had Project Popeye in Vietnam. These are historical fact. So we have weather being used as a weapon. And now, inarguably, from Hurricane Harvey, which was held in place for 3 days, that they knew a week ahead of time was going to behave in that manner. That's not nature. It's not a forecast. It's the scheduled weather. So we can speculate on the agendas, we can speculate on the motives, but the fact that weather warfare is being waged against U.S. populations by their own government is absolutely inarguable. And we must, and this is critically important, we must consider that this is also biological warfare. Absolutely, at minimum, because of the toxic elements being used for climate engineering, and it is certainly very probable that biologicals are being used as well. And if that doesn't trigger some action in the American public, what do? When every breath we take is toxic, we know these particles. We have recent study to prove that human hearts and brains are showing up with not millions, but billions of nanoparticulates lodged in them, hearts and brains. This is from plastic polymer nanoparticulates to heavy metal nanoparticulates. We are literally being slow killed. Now, whether that's a primary agenda or not, I can't say, I can't know. But the fact that it's occurring is indisputable fact.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in a fight for life, again, and we have all these factors converging. But back to the motives, again, to try to mask the severity of what's unfolding from the population, to continue to use weather as a weapon. Think of that as a weapon. It's a crown jewel weapon of the power structure. They can destabilize nations without those populations ever even knowing they were at war.
Absolutely. Now, in deference to your time, respect to your time, we'd like to take one more question from the chat room, if we may, and then we'll go ahead and close for the evening. Okay?
Absolutely, no problem.
Thank you.
If you have a couple more questions, I don't want to leave anybody hanging. If you have a couple more questions, I'll try to hang as long as I can here.
Okay, because I realize you did your own radio program just before coming on with us, so I respect your energy.
But I am immensely grateful for both of you and your willingness to make your voice heard in this most critical battle. I'm very grateful to you.
No problem. We're happy to do it for you.
It's a battle on many fronts, Dane. And again, when Scripture tells us that there will be wars and rumors of wars, it's not wars in the sense that we think, this country announced war against that country like they did, years ago. The rumor is, is this biological warfare? Is it chemical warfare? The rumors are the things that people are talking about, but you can't come to a definitive, you can't get anybody to own up to it and define it. So it is rumors of these various types of wars, weather warfare that are taking place. So once again, we have to broaden our view and context of Scripture to see that it actually confirms what you are doing in your research. And I thank you for that, because part of, the biggest part of Anthony and I and what we bring to the public is the spiritual side of these things as we're seeing them evolve, so that people can be aware and to change the thinking and the type of thinking from almost the literal reading of the word to being able to think critically, to see it in its varying and multifaceted way of working itself out.
Right. The interpretations and the definitions of the words.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take the question.
It was, they want to know, what is the Lucy Project?
Project Lucy and Project Alamo. And I'll get to that in a minute. Let me add to what you just said, if I could, guys. And I appreciate so much that you are here for the greater good. You feel a sense of responsibility to the whole, to your Maker, and I can only hope that all those pastors, and again, I've met with so many, I hope they remember the Scripture that faith without works is dead. And we see so many that are simply hiding behind their pulpits. And I, at one point, to Calvary Chapel. You know who Calvary Chapel is? Ever heard of Calvary Chapel? Very big organization.
Yes.
I've heard of them. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I going back quite a distance, but there was a Calvary Chapel in the high desert of Southern California that I felt was doing exceptional work in the community. And I had more resources then. I've spent those resources on this battle now in the last 20 years. But I gave that church I know the top people in Calvary, I gave them $30,000 to buy a parcel next to their church so they could expand and I felt do more good work in the community. When I attempted to contact them to just pass on data on the climate engineering issue, they wouldn't even return my call. What kind of hypocrisy is that?
Absolute hypocrisy.
Yep.
And not to pick on that particular institution. I'm sure there's good people still there in that group, but you can see why I have a bit of a angst toward that. And on the overall issue, I'm sorry, guys, I got on that tangent.
No,
I didn't
not at all.
pin the question.
Call it out.
No.
Call it out.
Well, again, it's something that it's up to the congregations to hold their pastors accountable in every institution, and I that includes environmental groups and other groups as well. And it will take all of us to do this. And there's too many right now sitting the bench, and people do feel they feel helpless often, and that's not the case. And I encourage people to consider how you arm yourselves with credible data and how much that helps. Pointing at the sky and ranting doesn't do any good at all. It typically shuts people down. But if you simply ask the question, are you aware of this? The media and governments are trying to mask this from us because of the liability issues it has created for them. And you pass on credible printed data, that is exponentially more effective than any verbal dissertation. So we're trying to encourage people to consider how to wake those around them, ask those around them to engage in this effort as well. And there's on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org the activist suggestions link. On geoengineeringwatch.org we have the our 20-page fact and photo summary booklets, flyers. We have PDFs for those flyers, so people, if they choose, can download and print those materials for themselves, or they can order them from geoengineeringwatch.org for our approximate cost of producing and shipping. We only want to get these materials into circulation because we are rapidly running out of time. And I'm sorry, Kathleen, I got on such a tangent. What was the original question?
It was Lucy and Alamo.
Lucy and Alamo. Acronyms for microwaving, programs to microwave the atmosphere in another desperate and destructive tech attempt to molecularly degrade the buildup of methane in the atmosphere. And this is another, the methane again is, you hear the cow flatulence referred to as a problem with methane. And is that a part of the equation? Yes, but a small part compared to fracking. And fracking is a small part, fracking and various other forms of hydrocarbon production. And that's a small part compared to what the warming has done to the planet, releasing these formerly frozen methane deposits. And I'd encourage your listeners again to search methane craters Siberia. They will be shocked at what they see. And your listeners can also consider this: the Bermuda Triangle ship sinkings that we've heard about for how many decades. And that's a direct result of these methane deposits thawing and releasing on the sea floor. These fields tend to release in their entirety. When that happens, it aerates the seawater column like a bottle of champagne. Ships have no buoyancy. They go down intact. This has been happening for decades.
Yep.
So we have the signs everywhere, and Project Lucy and Alamo designed to degrade this methane because the science community would have us believe methane is 20 times more potent than CO2, but that's over a 100-year time horizon. Over a 10-year time horizon, it's 100 to 120 times more potent. So quite literally, methane and nitrous oxide have the capability of turning this planet into Venus in the geologic blink of an eye.
That is astounding. I will have Doug set up some links on my homepage to your website, and I'll have some other discussions with him about possibly creating a single landing page of your information without taking away traffic from your site. I just want people to be able to find the information as readily as possible through my personal website.
We would certainly welcome that help. And I'm going to send you right now some of our links on Engineering Winter that would give a very clear picture to your listeners as to what's going on, much of the why. And again, the more credible data is circulated, this is where listeners can help so much by, even online, without leaving their home computer, they can find groups, organizations, and individuals that would care if they had any idea this was going on. And so if you draft a very polished letter to these groups and individuals, simply encouraging them to investigate this part of the equation and send them credible links to back that up, which we try to supply at geoengineeringwatch.org. In doing so, they can start spot fires of awareness. And as those spot fires grow and spread, we have a chance of reaching a critical mass of awareness. If we can do that, we have a chance of exposing and halting this insanity in our skies.
And again, working from within, inspiring people that are in organizations that are in the military-industrial complex, for example, and the pulpit, to work from within to motivate and have that action take place. And also I would encourage listeners, because this will go out publicly, this won't just be within our Patreon community, but this will go out publicly through my YouTube channel, to donate. And I know you have a donate button on your website, and I would encourage those that are able and capable and so moved to please donate and support Dane's research and reporting and activism and outreach, because again, his materials are provided at cost plus shipping. He doesn't profit from the materials, and I know that you have personally spent your personal fortune on all of this, and it is absolutely imperative that people, if they don't feel that they can be an activist, or they want to and can be an activist plus donate, that that's an effective way to help get the information spread, and to motivate others is to simply donate to your website.
Any contributions we get goes directly into the fight. We have activist outreach all over the world. We try to supply materials to many good activists in the field that don't have the resources to even cover costs, but we try to make sure they have those materials. We send them to various congressional reps, journalists, environmental groups. We send these material packages out everywhere. And so that's where that assistance goes.
Very good, sir.
So thank you for mentioning.
No, absolutely. Been following your research and reporting for years. I think it's got to be at least 10 years. I have the utmost respect for what you do. And you're not presenting it as a fearmonger. You're not being sensational. You're presenting the facts. You're approaching this from an empirical standpoint, as I said at the beginning before you came on. And totally endorse your methodology, your approach to it. And I do appreciate your absolute sacrifice. I know that you and your family have sacrificed really your entire livelihood, and I don't mean just financially, but you've put yourself physically in the crosshairs of those that would like to suppress and sequester all of this information. So I applaud you for your personal fortitude and courage, my friend.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Same right back at you and Kathleen. And it is our collective efforts that can yet make a difference at this late hour. And as I have stated many times, it is important for all of us to remember that we are not powerless, and those in power are not gods. We can yet make a difference if we stand together. So my deepest gratitude to both of you.
Amen, my friend. And with that, we'll go ahead and close for the evening. Thank you. I know you have very little time to be able to appear on other programs, but we will get this information spread as far as we can possibly push it.
And happy Thanksgiving, Dane, and to everyone that's listening tonight. We hope that you have a wonderful time enjoying special time with your family.
Thank you. And my deepest gratitude to all your listeners, all your followers. Thank you very much for, again, affording this time, and my gratitude to all those in your audience that have taken the time to listen in.
Thank you, my friend. And those in the audience, will have a couple of minutes that we'll spend with you after we say goodbye to Dane. God bless you, my friend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Again, that was Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org. And I appreciate everyone staying with us for almost 2.5 hours here this evening, but I think it was well worth hearing from him in a complete explanation of his position and his, fear. It's not fear-mongering, but his absolute concern for all of us, for the planet. This is clearly the most profound existential threat to humanity and to all life forms on the planet. So if we have some other questions that maybe Kathleen and I can address, happy to take a couple of minutes to do that. But I'm very respectful of your time, and I don't want to drag this out any longer.
Yeah, they can put their questions in the chat room if they have any. I don't see any that were
all right,
directed at us personally, but just to keep in mind, there are a few comments in the chat room about certain things that were stated that not everybody is going to agree on things. And again, we welcome if you have research that you've done, to share it. I know that Dane takes his research very, very seriously. But obviously, as many heads as we can put together in with respect to this and research, it's always welcome to bring new information, to the table. And so for those who might have a differing opinion or have a different view or have come up with research that you feel can more accurately depict or add to and confirm some of these things that he has brought to light, I encourage you to do so. We're all here to learn from one another, and it doesn't mean that everybody's going to agree on everything, but
we can have a conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay. I want to say happy Thanksgiving early to everyone. Thank you for your emails of encouragement, and we would solicit your emails for your prayer requests that we always honor and take very seriously, and we always follow through on, if you feel so inclined to share those needs with Kathleen and myself. So again, Thursday night being Thanksgiving, we will be enjoying family and friends here, so we will not be presenting a live stream tomorrow night, and we'll be back with you, Lord willing, on Sunday evening to expand upon this domino theory and the third wave. We'll have more information along those lines on Sunday evening. So thank you again, and God bless you all. And we greatly value you as friends.
Good night.
Good night.